Hello, everyone. We are going to be discussing the research process and essay in this brief lecture. What we are going to talk about is more or less main concepts. So, this may not necessarily be something that you look to put into your paper. Like, I'm not going to give you pointers on how to write something specifically, but these are ideas to get us started with developing a good research essay. So, one of the first things that is important to do is to understand the research process. And I think it's important to have some sort of conception of what the research process is. And so I have that in this little diagram here. And you can think of it as a model that moves back and forth between different parts of it. So I think that we begin with issues. So there is something there that you want to investigate, or something that you want to argue for, or something that you want to understand. And then you look at samples. And so this would be preliminary research, and your research is going to have some sort of methodology. For us, it's not that difficult. Our methodology is going to be archival research, and that'll come up later here. But if you're writing a paper in your writing intensive class and they require a research paper, for some of you, you might have a particular methodology that you have to follow, because that's just how your discipline works. So keep that in mind if you have to write research essays in your own field. So this next slide just kind of goes over again what I had said briefly before. So the issue is what you want to investigate. So you got to have that sort of beginning. You have to have an idea, something you want to investigate or argue. And then the sample over here would be the focus group that you will collect data about. So, for example, when discussing colony collapse disorder, your sample might be the whole US or maybe just California. I say Sacramento, but that's just for an example. Don't do Sacramento, obviously, because it's far too local. It would be not enough information to go on. And then your methodology would be one or maybe all of these things. It could be a couple of these things, but you would do some sort of test or observation or some sort of study, perhaps a questionnaire. Interviews might be helpful. And then, of course, archival research. And this is really where we are at. We conduct archival research for our essays. That is when you go online or you go into the library and look for books, you look for articles, mostly peer-reviewed stuff, although credible sources would work as well. And then you take that information and you utilize that further. I would like to say, though, because we live in California, that an interview is also not out of the question. So there are beekeepers around, there are farmers around, and perhaps talking to one of them could be interesting, because it would be a juxtaposition against your archival research to say, hey, here's what I'm finding in literature as far as published work in academic journals goes, but here I have an interview with a beekeeper, and they are saying X, and perhaps X is along the lines of what's happening in your archival research. Perhaps it's not. maybe it's a different view. Maybe in this particular area, this farmer is actually okay, or I should say beekeeper is actually okay, and they're not seeing the same kind of trends that are being seen nationally. And that could lead to some other questions. Why? What are they doing differently? Is it because their operation is so small? Is it the same size as others that are losing bees? Is it something different they're feeding? What does the bees' environment look like, right? So an interview, I think, could happen, but it's one of those things where you have to really be proactive and get out there and do it. All right, so that's the first part of understanding the research process. The second is your data collection and analysis. So when you are conducting archival research, or when you're doing an interview, or when you send a questionnaire out to 100 people, or you develop some sort of study, what you are doing is you are collecting data. You're just gathering data. And then the next step goes from data collection to data analysis. So you want to take all that data that you have and you want to analyze it. And here is where you're going to separate the different pieces of data and try to look for trends, or come up with some sort of idea that perhaps answers your questions, or perhaps gives you more questions than you originally began with. So the analysis is actually the fun part of research, because it tells you what you know, it tells you what you don't know, and it tells you what you need to know. So your data collection is going to focus on a sample. I say your sample, or I would suggest your sample be the entire United States, because this is a trend we're seeing across the US as far as bee colonies collapsing. And then your data analysis determines what the data is saying, and it develops a research document. So it is from your analysis that you develop your document. A lot of people think like, oh, I find like 4 or 5 different research articles and I take bits and pieces from them and I just slap them into my essay. Well, you can do that. I'm not going to lie. When I was a college student, I did that too in some cases, but that is not the best research. The best research essay that you can write is one that analyzes the data. So tries to understand what is happening and give the reader information off of that. Okay, and then the third part of the research process is to disseminate the findings. So this could be a research report. It could be a press release. It could be a journal article. For our purposes in this class, it is going to be an essay. For some of you in other classes, you might have to give a presentation, or it might be a combo of an essay and a presentation. But for us, we're just looking at an essay. And so that is how you're going to share your findings. So let's talk about the research process. I think that there is this notion that writing is a linear process. It starts from idea to perhaps some research, and then some sort of paper that you write, and then you turn in and you're done. And I would argue that this is perhaps not the best model. So this idea of moving from abstract to concrete, we can do better than this. And I would instead propose a different sort of model. And this is a more cyclical model. This is one where different pieces you return to, you leave, and you do it again. So like in a cycle. So of course, we all have our main idea, and we begin to write our paper, and we have research for our paper. So We're going to begin writing our paper right now, even before we've done any great research. And that is why I'm putting this in our unit now, because we're beginning this process. And so you're going to write, you're going to research, and this will go over and over and over again until you put it all together into an essay over here. Now, of course, yes, at some point the essay is going to be written, at some point it's going to be done, but conceptually, you're never done with a piece of writing. It just keeps going on. But for our purposes, indeed, the essay will have a deadline and you will have to turn it in by a certain time. But I want to give you guys enough time so that you can have this process of writing and researching, and that it keeps going over and over, right? And you might switch back and forth. So it might not be cyclical in one way. It can revolve in either direction. So that's the idea, is that writing and researching aren't separate parts. Those happen together. You do little bits here, little bits there, and then you return to doing one or the other, and it keeps working like that. So if we're going to use this model right here, then I don't like that. So if we're going to use this model right here, that means that we need to start our writing early. And in this class, I've broken up your research paper into different pieces. So you're going to have a research question that you have to develop, and you're going to turn that in, and that's going to guide your research. And then you're going to have an annotated bibliography. So this is where you should hopefully find many of your sources that you'll use. That's not to say that you are going to be limited to what you found in your annotated bibliography, because writing is it's a cycle. So it's going to go from writing the paper to research. That means you can again research, but hopefully during the annotated bibliography you will find many of the main sources that you're going to put into your paper. So that's why we're starting the writing right now, and that's why we only really have one essay in this class, because we're going to be writing this essay, we're going to be working on it throughout the entire semester. Okay, so that was the research process. Now what I want to talk about is understanding and developing a research essay. Now, this looks different depending on what discipline you're in. So the structure that we often see in sciences and social sciences is this. You have an abstract followed by an introduction, given a purpose, and then you got to list your methodology, and then you're going to share your results. What did you find? And then your conclusions. What can be gathered from the results? So a lot of people like this or don't like this. I can go either way with it. I think it's kind of nice to have a structure, because you know what's going to fit neatly into each of these boxes. You know what you're supposed to do as you write your paper. And also it's kind of nice because in the research part of it, it also gives you an idea of thinking about how you develop your research, because you know what you got to put in your paper. So you know there's got to be clear methodology. You know you have to state a purpose. You know you're going to have to talk about your results. So I honestly like this approach, but unfortunately in the field of English, this isn't quite what we use. But that doesn't mean that we can't draw from it. So another important thing to understand is, what kind of research are you developing? What kind of essay are you writing? There are two types. The first, you have analytical. So an analytical looks at and evaluates previous research. Okay, so that would be like archival research, something we're going to be doing, in order to provide a new perspective on an issue. So a thesis if you can call it that, really it's the research question, sets the reader up with asking a question and may provide a possible answer. I want to highlight the word may. Yeah, maybe there's an answer, but don't expect one. Go into this open-minded, go into this trying to understand something. And a lot of research, a lot of academic research is trying to fill in the gaps. So you may not have a specific answer to the question you're asking, but by the end of it, we should know something more. We should know something new that helps fill in the picture for everyone else so that maybe in 10, 20 years, we can finally see it all. So that is an analytical research. Your second type of research is an argumentative research. And this sort of essay takes a stand with some sort of fresh idea and it backs it up with claims and evidence found through research. So the thesis, if we want to call it that, makes a strong statement and the paper proves it. So in this sense, there isn't really a thesis, there isn't really a research question. It's more of a thesis statement that we're putting into a research essay. So by now, just by the things that we've talked about in this class so far and throughout this lecture, it should hopefully become clear that we are not going to be engaging in an argumentative research essay. We are looking at the analytical. I want us to practice analysis. And I want us to go in with open minds and try to understand a topic that we knew nothing about before. And I want us to be able to hopefully find out interesting things, perhaps something new that we can share with each other and get a bigger picture of colony collapse disorder. So this type of research paper is not just a regurgitation of information. I just don't want you to say, hey, I'm going to talk about colony collapse disorder. I'm going to talk about this particular topic within colony collapse disorder. Here's what the literature is saying. Done. Not really looking for that. If I wanted that, I could just read the articles myself. So that's not what we're looking for. Instead, I want you to engage with the information. I want you to have intelligent thoughts where you take that information and try to not necessarily just understand it, but engage with it. Ask questions. What is left unknown? What is left unsaid? And then make conclusions with that. It's called, that term, an educated guess. Well, that's sort of what we're doing because we're not really conducting research ourselves, but we are gathering enough research that we can look at things and we can say, based on that research, I think we can make these conclusions. And then offer some conclusions and evaluations regarding this topic. Obviously, it's got to be backed up with logical thinking. Like, you're not just going to throw some whacked up theory in there without any support, so your conclusions should draw from the material that you've read, and they should be able to support your conclusions. So but this is where we want to go. We want to have a thoughtful conversation within our essays about the topic that you've chosen. Some important things to keep in mind when formulating an analytical research essay are the following. And I think that this can help you have a little direction in your paper. So first, be able to answer research questions objectively. And so what we mean by this is be sure to be using sources and material It's going to give you enough facts, statistics, numbers, graphs, etc. So these are things that we can objectively measure when conducting research, and these are the types of things that will help you in your paper. Don't go in with preconceived notions or opinions. That's one reason why I choose this topic, is because a lot of people don't have any knowledge about it or have even heard of it prior to being introduced to it. And so it relieves a lot of those preconceived notions and opinions. Evaluate the topic and draw conclusions from factual information. So make sure that your conclusions can be supported by your source material. You just can't say something that can't be supported. Now, that doesn't mean you can't make educated guesses, right? So based on the material that I see, I think that the trend is X, right? So you're making an educated conclusion really about your topic because of the material that you have read and that supports your paper. But you better have a good body of source material before you do something like that. So bring together findings to answer the research question. And that's if you can, because sometimes the research question may not be something that can be answered. It might be something that's continued to be worked on. It might be something that opens up even more questions than you had in the first place. But what these all do is they bring together information so that we can paint a picture, if you will, or think of it as a puzzle where every researcher has a different piece. And as we see all the pieces come together, we're finally able to see what the entire puzzle looks like. So think of it in that respect. And then use serious contemplation and critical evaluation to answer your research question. Serious contemplation and critical evaluation. So I want you to take the time to really think about this. I don't want to just see an essay that has, here's my topic, here's what my sources have said, the end. If I wanted that, I could simply just read source material about this, right? I don't want that. I want you to take the time to think. That's part of this class. So use some critical thinking tools. And I want you to evaluate what is being said and the topic itself. And if you can't answer your question, great. If not, state so. Just be like, hey, we think that part of it is answered. We think that, we're getting to understanding a lot of what's happening here, but I can't give a full answer. So take the time to really engage with your material and develop a paper that has some good thought to it. So earlier I said that our discipline, so the humanities, doesn't really have a sort of structure like, say, the sciences or the social sciences. But we do have some things that we can rely on. So our essays, our research papers should begin with stating a question or a problem, something that needs some sort of resolution. And then you need to explain what makes the question or problem intriguing or even critical to address. So I think that it's not necessarily intriguing, colony collapse disorder, but rather critical, because we're talking about not only bees, but also us. So it's the livelihood of beekeepers, it's the livelihood of agribusiness, and it's our food chain, right? So if we don't have those natural pollinators, then we are going to have a lot less food, which means a lot less options for health. You'll want to talk about why your question or problem is unsolved. So, why is it so complex? Why haven't we been able to have the cure for whatever ails us so far? What issues specifically are you going to focus on? So, colony collapse disorder is a vast topic. You will need to discuss one thing, one of the little subtopics in there. So it could be pests, it could be nutrition, it could be climate change, it could be pesticides. Whatever it is, narrow your topic. Do not try to address all of those things in one paper, because that would be impossible. Make sure, and this is kind of stating the obvious, but you wouldn't believe what I read. So make sure that your sources are discussed in your paper. So what have your sources said about your topic? What do they say? Not a bad idea. Consult the experts. Put that in your paper. And then finally, conclusions and implications about your topic. So the very last paragraph or two in your paper should reiterate everything that you have discussed so far. And that is where you draw conclusions. And that is where you talk to the reader about what your findings would imply, why it's important to them, why they should care, how they're going to be affected. So you want to put all of that towards the end of your paper, and that is going to help give your paper purpose. All right. So everything right here is exactly what I went over on the other slide. Now, sometimes students feel overwhelmed or unsure when they begin drafting their essay. And so I think it could be helpful for you to think of the bullet points right over here as sections of an essay. So if you're absolutely struggling with this and you're thinking, I don't know how to write this paper, I hate research essays, I've never been good at them, and then your mind goes blank and you experience writer's block, this over here in the box is what's going to help you, right? So use these as a guide to begin drafting your paper. And if you think of them, as sections, well, this up here I could see as the intro, and I could see these guys down here as part of the body, and then this obviously is our conclusion. So what we have here is we have a bit of a structure. Now, this isn't a perfect structure, and again, I can't offer a structure to something that's not supposed to have one, but we know that every essay should have an introduction, a body, and a concluding paragraph, right? So those elements should all be there, and if you think of these bullet points, these would fit nicely into those three sections. So, just a thought. If you're struggling with this paper, then that could be a way to begin drafting. So finally, it's important that each section is appropriate in its size. So discussing the problem, why it's unsolved, shouldn't take up 3 pages, right? Your introduction, the question and the question's problem shouldn't be 1.5 pages. Like you should be able to get to that within 1 page. And the same with just the question or whatever the problem is that you're trying to solve. Like these should be appropriate for your essay. Your conclusions shouldn't take 5 pages. So you get what I'm saying here? We want a well-balanced essay. We're not wanting something where the introduction is so big that it's almost as big as your body of your essay. That would make no sense at all. So the introduction will be one of the smaller pieces of your essay, so will the conclusion. And it's really your body paragraph should take up the focus of your essay, but you don't want the different parts of those to be so that disproportionate that it doesn't make sense to the reader. So make sure that you have a well-balanced essay. Okay, so that's it for this lecture. The main takeaway right now is just the concepts. So we're not sitting down and actually writing the essay right now. We're not sitting down and trying to find all of our research right now, but I am introducing these concepts to you early so that you have time to think about it, because the process of understanding concepts is important, and oftentimes that takes time. So that's where we're at. This is where we're going to be heading. We're not quite there yet. So if you have questions or if you're afraid, calm down. Give it some time. There will be more material presented, and hopefully it will make more sense as we move along. But I needed to introduce this stuff to you guys right now. So that's it for this lecture. Please take the time to go through the rest of the material for this week. Thank you.